Today's session is about assessing in the town of Peterborough and what does it all mean. Taking this opportunity today to have a question and answer session with Will Corcoran, our town assessor. Will, thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure.
I have a number of questions here we'd like to go through, most of these have come to me through people calling me at the office, asking me various questions about what assessing is all about, and particularly what's been going on recently. But before we get into some of the details of those questions, I was wondering if you could give us an overview of your firm and what assessing services you provide to the town.
Sure. Appreciate the opportunity. There's no such thing as too much information when it comes to this. We're a company made up of real estate appraisers, mostly from the revaluation business. So in the past, there were large companies that would come into a town every 10 or 15 years and appraise everything in town, and then they move on to the next state, and we come from that business. Assessing and appraising are not the same thing. With the appraising, you have to go to school and get recertified every year or every 2 years. As assessing, you also have to get certified, but through a different process. So we decided we were tired of being moved around out of the United States. So those of us who are from this area, we formed the company in 1988, and we've been providing assessing services to a few select municipalities. We've been in Peterborough for about maybe 12 years now. There's 13 of us full-time, there's another 3 part-time. We've had the same people generally for 15 years. We've had the same towns that we've worked in for 15 to 20 years.
Great. Thanks. What role does the state play in the assessment process of properties?
If I could jump back 10 years ago, they played hardly any role at all. It was up to local control as to when they should change their values and how. However, many people might have heard of the Sorrell decision, which had to do with statewide education funding. The Supreme Court found in that case that the state had a role in the education of our children and to ensure distribution of a certain portion of that to ensure that no towns had an edge over another, because in the past you had very wealthy towns and they'd have the best schools, whereas you had some towns that were not wealthy and they had the poorest schools. So on that premise, the Supreme Court said the state needs to get involved. And at that time, the state was actually doing revaluations, and they didn't provide any oversight. But after the Sorrell decision, they created a bureaucracy, if you will, to oversee the entire process, and they watch not only when towns are doing it, but how they're doing it, who's doing it, what are their certification levels, and generally a pain in the neck to us, but it has helped to equalize and standardize the assessing around the state, and they are very active. We have a monitor come here in Peterborough, for example, at least once a month, and sometimes when we go through updates, value updates, they're in here every other week or so. So they play a very strong role in this process, and they can give a thumbs up or a thumbs down to the way the assessment process is conducted.
Great. Kind of following up on that, when was the last time a townwide valuation update was done?
If I could expand that question just a little bit, Leo, if you don't mind.
Okay. Yep.
Revaluations in the past used to be these roving reval companies that we used to work for example, would come into town totally unfamiliar with the town. We'd take over the assessing office and lock the door, go around and inspect every property as quickly as we could, because we only had a year to value the whole town, and we spent many weeks analyzing sales, and then every value changed, and sometimes drastically so, because if you haven't done a revaluation, let's say 10 or 15 years, the market moves at different rates for different properties, and they become disparate over time. So in 1999, we were asked to perform the revaluation for the town here in Peterborough, And that was the last time we had one of those full, throw out the baby and the bathwater, give us new values, new software systems, and new values. And so that was the last time we really had a full revaluation. Since then, we do valuation updates, and we'll get into this as much as you think we can or should. The old style revaluations are a thing of the past in New Hampshire. So we do valuation updates, which will address your question. The last time we had a value update was in 2009. And should I explain the difference?
If you'd like, yeah, that'd be great.
As opposed to throwing the baby in the bathwater out, we keep our existing records. We keep the existing systems that we use, the computer systems and databases, as much as we can, try to keep up with current technology. But we do not just throw out all the old records. We institute a process that's consistent with our state laws, and let me talk about that. The Constitution of New Hampshire requires the evaluation of all the states anew every 5 years or less, as the court may require. And when they say court, they mean the legislature. So that puts a whole different, it was a game changer. And when the Sorrell decision came out, they pointed to this constitutional requirement. And so every 5 years, you're supposed to go through this revaluation. So that's very troublesome to taxpayers. It really is, having come from the revaluation racket, I have seen tax bills triple in 1 year, as some tax bills get cut in half. And maybe that's not so bad for like New York City or New York, because they have all kinds of taxes. They have income, sales tax, you name it. So it's somewhat offset, but here we rely so heavily on the property tax, it became a fairness issue. Is it really fair, right or wrong, that you should double a person's tax bill? In our opinion, it is not fair, and it's not a good way to proceed. So back after 1999, we explained to the selectmen a new process called the update process. And what we do is rather than inspect every property, which has to be inspected every 5 years, all at once, and force people into our schedule, you know, they have to take off work, and we spread that out. So we inspect 10 to 20% of all properties every year. So when 5 years rolls around, we've inspected them all, and then we begin again. So we're consistent with that constitutional requirement to inspect. Now that's not revaluation, that's just to make sure our database is correct. And we can be surprised how much can change in 5 years. Building permit process is very consistent here. However, things seem to grow sometimes without a building permit, at least building permits that we may receive. So it's important that we keep our database, since our valuations are based on the good data. That's one component of it. So, and we've been doing that since 2003, I believe. So we're actually on our second cycle now, coming around to our third. The other part of it is we watch the market every year. So let's say in the first year it was stable into the second year. There's no need to make any changes in value if the market was stable. Well, let's say in the mid-2000s, for example, the market was really on a tear, and more so for some properties than others. Condominiums were a tremendous market phenomenon. Whether it's the aging of the baby boomers, I don't know, but certainly the values increased more so than residential, single family, or commercial. And so we had, rather than go put the entire town through a revaluation, we singled those condominiums out and took them out of the group and put them at the same level as other people in the town, so their assessments were reflecting market value. And to the best we're able to, we've been doing that every year. Condos have settled down. They did settle down in 2007 or so. And actually, the single families also saw a terrific increase between 2003 and 2008. So each year, we keep an eye on it, and we make changes to categories, not everybody, but general categories that were falling out of line with the rest of the properties as a whole. And that really is the process that we've been going through. And we don't do this on our own. We do this with the blessing of the selectmen. Even though we are the assessor's agents, the Board of Selectmen retain all the authority of the assessors. But because of the certification requirement that you have to be certified in order to appraise, then they hire groups like us who are certified and to perform these revaluations, revaluation updates. So people still call them revaluations. They are technically, but they're really, I call it a revaluation light. So you don't see doubling of tax bills, halving of tax bills. It's a very important component to any homeowner's or business owner's expense, and so it's treated more delicately by doing it incrementally as opposed to all at once.
Okay. Presently, the town is going through a valuation update for 2011. What has really precipitated this, doing this? The last time it was done, I believe you said in 2009. Now we get 2 years later. Give us some insight on why we're doing it in 2011.
True. In 2009, we started, we go back into the 2008, we had the Lehman Brothers, and all these other organizations start to fall apart. It had a lot to do with the financing of real estate, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, etc. And we started to see movement. That's why we changed values a little bit in 2009. Things became fairly stable through, though there were ups and downs, little ups and downs, it was reasonably stable through 2010. However, beginning in late 2010 and into 2011, we're starting to see a lot of declines in single-family housing, condominiums, you name it, just about every category. And it's time to put them back in line with, so that the idea is that if commercials are at 100%, condos should be at 100%. Single-family residents should be at 100%. Everyone should be at 100%. If we're at 90%, everyone should be at 90%. So we shoot for anywhere between 95 and 100%, and then try to move all categories to that. This year is a little more intense because of I believe that the market is absorbing some of these bank-owned properties. And while we can't use, I hope you asked me about what kind of sales we use later.
Yeah.
Even though we can't use bank sales or foreclosure sales, when these properties are put on the market, they compete with normally marketed properties, and it has a downward effect. If you want to get your house sold, you need to get down into the price range they're being asked for. So still, a normal sale will sell for more than a bank resale, but they're competing with them, so their price has been softer, and we have seen over the past 14 months a pretty precipitous decline in most all classes of property.
One of the things that you were just talking about were percentages, 90%, 95%. I'm assuming you're talking about the equalization ratios?
I am.
Maybe you could explain that a little bit, because people ask me that question quite often in terms of what the equalization ratio and what does it really mean?
And it's an excellent question. When we say a ratio, let's say I want to take it very simply first and we'll build up. A ratio, an assessment to sale ratio, simply means that if a house is assessed for $100,000 and it's sold for $90,000, that tells us that our assessments are 10% high. The ratio on that particular sale is 110%. State standards are that we need to keep our assessments between 90 and 110%. So we have a 20% range in there. We try to keep it as close to 100 as possible. But no one sale makes a market. So the state and we take all the sales that occur in the town, and we compare their assessments to their sales prices, and it gives us that ratio. And sometimes it's never one number. It could be 88 and then 102 and so forth. And each year the state takes those sales and they take the median, they array them from high to low, the lowest ratio to the highest ratio of all the sales that have occurred in town, legitimate sales, and they take the middle point, or the median, and they say that that's your ratio for the year, that's your equalization ratio. The reason they say equalization is because then they then take that number and equalize us with the rest of the towns in the state. I won't get into detail. It involves public utilities and many other facets, but we have a school district, for example. And what the state does with that number is, say we have a total value in the town of $100 million. We have more than that, but say $100 million. The state, if we're at 90%, they will take us and move us up 10%. And let's say the adjoining community that we share a town with is at 110%. They'll take their total value and equalize it down by 10%. So that we're all equal, and that's what they mean by equalization. From there, then they determine how much should this town contribute or receive through that equalization process. So at a local level, we don't get involved in that. Okay, that's a state function,
Right.
But they use our numbers. So locally, we only care, or only concerned, that all our properties are as close to the same ratio as possible. And so for us, it's a ratio. For the state, it's an equalization number.
Okay. What impact does the cycle inspections that are going on right now with the update?
Another excellent question, and one that I get a lot of questions about. We have to keep our database current and accurate. In order to get any range of reasonable accuracy with our assessments, we have to have the right data. How many square feet? What kind of condition is it in? Where is it located? You have topography concerns, etc. All that data goes on individual sheets, and we break the town up into 5 portions. 4 residential portions, and they're really geographic. So we take a quadrant of the town for 4 years, and then the 5th year we do commercials and industrials. And then we start again. So if we decide not, if the selectmen agree that we should not change values, let's say, for example, if we found during that year that somebody had 3 bathrooms instead of 2 that we have on the record, they would see a slight increase in their assessment. Or if we found that the shed that we had been assessing for $1,000 fell down, or a tree fell on it, we would remove that, and that assessment would go down as a result of data-driven. So even though the town would not authorize an update of values, we still have to recognize that if your house is in better shape than it was on the record, we need to reflect that whether we had an update or not. Similarly, if we find that there's been extreme deterioration of a house or a building, we need to represent that right away, not wait until we have an update. So that's it's different than the overall update. It's an individual. So it could go up, it could go down. Because we've been through 2 cycles of inspections, we're seeing very few changes now. So
that's good. What is market value? That's a interesting question that comes up quite often.
There are many definitions of market value, and I think the best definition can be found on Wikipedia. It has an excellent description. However, when those of us who are trained in the real estate appraisal field, or any kind of appraisal field actually, we're told a treatise that spells out exactly what is meant by market value, fair market value. It means that a property that is exposed on the market for a reasonable period of time with no pressure, undue pressure by buyer or seller to buy or sell, and all the things prerequisite to a fair sale. That's generally the description. So if you have we don't consider bank sales. I talked about that earlier. And the reason of that is because this is not a willing seller. They have to sell it. You will have people who, let's say a new assessing clerk comes into town, and he's from Concord. Well, they have to buy a house here, and they better buy it fast. And so that may be undue pressure. You may have paid more than a typical person would pay for that very same house. So we try to find the typical average owner who sells because they want to and won't take anything more or less than they believe it's worth, or no less than what it's worth. In these times, it's very difficult because we have so many competing bank sales. Again, even though we don't look at the bank sales, it's having an effect on normally marketed properties. So there is an effect. We can't ignore that.
As a kind of a follow-up with that, and I know you talked about it just a little bit earlier, what sales are used in determining market value? and hopefully it's not too repetitive of what you've already said, but
It's not. It's an integral part of the process. When we get a sale through, the first thing we do is we look at the deed. And we see there's a quit claim covenants, is it a warranty deed, was it a state transaction? And we get as much information we can from the deeds. And we receive those deeds from the Registry of Deeds typically a month within the sale. Once we get that information, it's recorded locally on our record cards. And then we have one of our senior appraisers go out and inspect these properties. And they also interview the homeowner. And I believe we have a questionnaire.
yes, we send out a questionnaire once we've gone through the process of reviewing the deed and updating the property record cards.
Good, right. So we send a letter to the new owner, welcome to Peterborough.
Yes.
By the assessor's office.
Yes.
And we ask them such things like, normally, we have on record 3 baths, or how many bedrooms do you have? Is there a finished basement? And we also ask whether it was a cash sale or whether there's any kind of unusual circumstances involved in the sale. And that goes into a file that after our inspector goes there, he verifies the data on sales, even though it's not part of this cycle we talked about earlier. We want to make sure that the data that happened in this sale price is accurately reflected, because we'll be generating other values based on that data. So it's critical that we get it exactly right. And then we also receive a form from the Department of Revenue Administration, and everyone who closes in New Hampshire on a property has to fill out what they call a PA 34. Basically, it asks similar questions. Was there any personal property included in the sales price? It asks a number of questions, and it's in 8 font, so it's very, they try to get as much as they could on one page. And unfortunately, it often gets short shrift, because in the closing of properties, you have all kinds of documents to sign and transfer and so forth. And this is just another one that is required by the state, that you represent exactly what was paid for the property and the circumstances that surrounded it. We get a copy of that as well. So that goes into our database. We pay attention very closely to the sales, because that tells us what other properties may be worth of similar types.
Okay. Kind of a follow-up with that, question I get quite often is, will my new assessment, they just bought a new house, will my new assessment be exactly the same as my recent purchase price?
Not an unreasonable question. In most people's minds, they have established what that market value is by buying it. And ordinarily, that may be a good indication. But the truth of the matter, in the real estate market, there is no one value that is market value. There is a range of probable selling prices. So you can take the very same type house, selling at the same time, being advertised on the market at the same point in time, and you'll get 2 different selling prices. Which one is market value? Well, the truth of the matter is that it's somewhere in between. So we're not looking at what one person paid. We're looking at what would probably, a number that represents the best probability of what it would have sold, and that may be more or less than what the person paid for it. So if you ask me to give a number, most appraisals will say 10%. Oftentimes a taxpayer will approach me and say, you have $300,000 on my house. I have an appraisal here that says $290,000. Well, that's an exact agreement. That's less than 5%. And that is an agreement, because there is a market tolerance out there. It's not like mathematics so much as probability and statistics.
Okay. When will the new values from the reval update impact the tax bills?
This coming fall tax bill, sometime in October, November, whenever we mail tax bills, the number will be reflected on that bill.
Okay. What can a taxpayer do if they disagree with their assessment?
They can come in and greet you and tell you that they're unhappy, or they have concerns, or they have data that would show otherwise. From there, it becomes what they call an abatement process. It's really an informal local review. though you have to fill out a form. Many times people walk in saying, my value is too high, and the first thing we do is we hand them an abatement application. Say, let's get this first, because the form has to be filled. It's not a big deal. And then we just simply open up the doors. You give them to us, and we go out and interview the people, see what their concerns are, see if there's any legitimacy to their concerns. And then we make recommendations based on our findings to the Board of Selectmen. And they will say yes or no, usually based upon our, and sometimes they ask us to go back and take another look. Did we consider this or that? So the taxpayer will receive a written answer to their abatement application. That process begins the minute tax bills are issued and ends March 1st subsequent. So in this instance, it would be March 1st, 2012. So if you're going to appeal or you want us to review that assessment officially, you need to get an abatement application in before March 1st. And it's not that we have discretion. These are state laws. It's a deadline. We cannot, unless you can show you were tied up by somebody and couldn't get out. That's a hardship, and certainly this. But normally that process, you have to have it in by March 1st. I tell people, why wait? If you have a problem, let's get it done right away. Sometimes it's a matter of a clerical error. Sometimes it could be anything.
Sure.
We're also open-minded. We're not going to sit there and make you make your point. Every taxpayer, even you don't have to be an appraiser to be an expert. People, I would say, especially in Peterborough, perhaps, are pretty savvy and have an understanding of real estate values and such things. And so it's just a matter of talking to us and finding out whether, first of all, the data is correct or incorrect. And then once they, if I can take us a little further, Leo?
Yes.
Let's say that the taxpayer is not satisfied with our response or the town's response to their abatement request. They then have till September 1st of 2012 to appeal to the Board of Tax and Land Appeals or Superior Court. The Board of Tax and Land Appeals, if I can, I don't mean to take the lead here. Board of Tax and Land Appeals is a group of individuals at the state level that are appointed by the Supreme Court to hear property tax appeals. And sometimes they're appraisers, sometimes they're attorneys, but I have been up there many times, many years. They're always top-notch professionals who don't always agree with me, but have a very fair approach to things. So they do, and it's a little more informal than the Superior Court system. Any taxpayer can opt to go with the Superior Court as opposed to the Board of Tax and Land Appeals. Then you need an attorney, and there'll be no direct discussions between the taxpayer and the town. That's over. It will only be through the attorneys, through interrogatories, depositions, but it is an alternative. So that is available to people provided that they have applied a timely abatement application and have provided a timely application to the court, which is no later than September 1st, 2012 in this instance.
Okay. Sometimes, I hear about informal type hearings. How would that come into play? If someone was upset with their abatement, their assessment, went through the abatement process, is an informal hearing another remedy, I guess, to help the taxpayer understand their assessment a little bit better?
Yes, and I would say, and I would encourage anybody who's has serious questions about their assessment or the assessing process to simply contact you. You don't need a form to talk to you or us. We have an individual in the town that at least twice a week or once or twice a week. And I have a staff appraiser, and she has a field supervisor. I am called in on occasion, and we're never adverse to meeting people, either here or at their property. It makes no difference. So it's not that formal, and that's why we call it informal. Give us a call. We'll be there.
Yep.
And, we don't quibble. We don't play bureaucracies. This is not a bureaucracy. These are tax bills, and they need to be as right as we can make them as well.
Okay. That's pretty much all the questions that I had. Is there anything that you would like to add to the overall assessing process here in town?
No, and I appreciate that. I would say that The folks here in Peterborough are unique. We work all around the state, mostly in cities, but the folks here are unique. And I want to thank them for being patient when we come knocking at your door saying, we want to walk through your house. It's okay if the laundry isn't cleaned. We know it's an inconvenience, but it is a necessary part of the process, and we do appreciate your patience. We find you would expect that we would receive angry or be received angrily. We're not. We're not. It's kind of one of those things, oh, it's just something we got to go through. Or if they say if it's too busy, it's a bad time, just say so. We don't have to go there the minute we're there. We normally send a letter out informing the area that we're going to, but we don't say a specific date because we don't know. So when we come, if it's a bad time, it's okay to say, can you please come back? It's fine. We don't get angry. We don't pencil whip anybody. We would, and even if you forget to call us, we're going to send you a letter saying that we tried. We do send callback letters. That we try to get in. Would you call Leo and schedule an appointment so we can come out and take a look at it? So we try to make it as painless and as unobtrusive as possible. But either way, we really do appreciate the courtesy that we receive here in the town of Peterborough.
Well, thanks, Will. I appreciate you taking the time to go through this Q&A session with us today. As you know, we have a lot that's been going on in the assessing process here in town, and we thought that it would be a good idea to put this together, and hopefully the information we provide today will be helpful to our taxpayers.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yep.